Buenas noches y seguimos nuestro estudio de los pronombres. This will be a continuation of our review of the hoja de práctica on the use of pronouns. We began this worksheet on lunes el 29 de abril, and I would like to finish this worksheet in advance of our prueba on miércoles el 1 de mayo. We're going to pick up with número 7, and we're going to examine the rest of the worksheet looking for which use of pronouns. Remember, we may have uses of direct object pronouns, of indirect object pronouns, of commands with pronouns. We may also have examples of the accidental occurrence, and we may also have pronouns after prepositions. Let's take a look at number 7. She used the tomato and she was cutting it into small pieces. Now I have down here, ella usó el tomate y lo estaba cortando en pedazos pequeños. What we should recognize right here is in the second clause, she was cutting it. What is the it? Well, we should draw that back to tomato. The what of cutting is our direct object. Now, as you see, she used the tomato, a use of the preterite, and she was cutting, which is the imperfect, in progress. In my original version, I have lo estaba cortando. With this traditional use, we put the pronoun before the verb form, before the conjugated verb. But I also, in parentheses, have a second form, o estaba cortándolo. You may recall from when we went over the use of pronouns that there are two situations when you can attach a pronoun to the end. And remember, this is not referring to commands, that you can attach a pronoun to the end of an infinitive, or in this case, the gerund. The gerund being our ando, yendo form. If I do cortándolo, notice how I pick up an accent over the A. So once again, in número 7, we have the use of a direct object pronoun. Número 8. You will need to bring your documents because we cannot travel without them. If you look at this original sentence, we cannot find any concrete direct object, nor do we have any indirect object. This is not a command, and we don't seem to have any use of the accidental occurrence. Instead, I want to point your attention towards the end. Without them, this will end up being a pronoun after preposition. Tienes que traer tus documentos, porque no puedes viajar sin ellos. Sin is one of our prepositions. Other examples of prepositions: a, de, con, por, para, and so forth. The reason I use ellos is because them is referring to my documents. En español, mis documentos, which is masculine and plural. This will replace documentos. 9. You all had homework, but no one gave it to me. In this sentence, I have you all, which is a classic ustedes. So I'm talking about the plural, but no one gave it to me, it being homework. Todos ustedes tenían tarea. Remember, I use the imperfect of tener because when I'm talking about possession in the past, that's the imperfect of tener. Pero nadie me la dio. We should identify here it, homework, our direct object, and to me, me, the indirect object. The general rule of pronoun placement tells me that I have to put pronouns before the conjugated verb, dio. And if I do have both object pronouns, I put indirect first, direct second. Lastly, nadie, just like alguien, is always singular. Número 10. You may look at the art, but please do not touch it. And in parentheses, I have informal. That should be a cue that we are talking about a command. And informal commands are always in the voice of tú. So if we examine the version in español, puedes mirar el arte, pero por favor no lo toques. First, note the use of mirar. I do not want ver, because ver is just to see, whereas mirar is look at. And then for arte, el arte, remember that it is one of those words that has the singular el article, even though it begins with a. For the command part, please do not touch it. Por favor, no lo toques. When we are talking about commands, all pronouns go before the mandato. 11. She is upset because she lost her keys. On the original homework, when you did this, I had you circle 11 because this is the accidental occurrence. It is not that she purposely lost her keys, it's just that she can't find them, that they got lost on her. So, ella está enojada, she is upset. There are other ways you can say upset, this is not the only way. Porque se le perdieron las llaves. So note, when we have the accidental occurrence, we have the use of two pronouns. The reflexive se, which matches up with the verb perdieron. Now, if you want to think about se perdieron, note that perdieron is third person plural. In other words, the voice of ellos, ellas, ustedes. In this case, las llaves. The keys lost themselves. And who was affected by the situation? The indirect object le, which goes back to ella. Ella está enojada porque se le perdieron las llaves. In other words, the keys accidentally lost themselves or became lost on her. 12. Why do they talk to themselves? We look very quickly. We don't see any indirect object, direct object. This is not a command. This is not accidental occurrence, nor do we have any pronoun after preposition. Instead, we have an action happening between two groups of people. This is the reciprocal, which will use the reflexive structure. ¿Por qué ellos se hablan? Remember that when we use the reciprocal, we are creating a reflexive structure from a verb that is not normally reflexive. Hablar is one of them. To create that, we use the appropriate reflexive pronoun that matches the verb. In this case, we know that the reflexive pronoun se modifies either él, ella, usted, or ellos, ellas, ustedes. In this case, ellos. 13. I put my daughter to bed at 8 o'clock. I want you to look carefully here, and we may immediately think I put my daughter as being a form of poner. But I also want to point out something that you will likely recall from Spanish 1 that one of the classic reflexive verbs is acostarse, to put oneself to bed. I included this example because it is an interesting illustration of what happens to a verb that is normally reflexive when it loses its reflexive characteristics. In number 12, we talked about a verb that is not reflexive and giving it those characteristics. Numero 13 is the opposite. We are taking it away. In this case, I didn't put myself to bed, so it's not reflexive. Instead, I put someone else to bed. You can look at it as, who did I put to bed? My daughter. So I can still use the verb acostar, in this case in the preterite acosté, and instead of a reflexive pronoun, I am using a direct object pronoun. Yo la acosté a mi hija. I put a mi hija at the end just to clarify who the la is referring to. This is a little more advanced, but I wanted to introduce it to you since it does increase the complexity of your expression. I will now continue with the remaining examples in the second video. So please proceed now to video number 2 to review examples 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Gracias.